Sir, we are in live. Good to go.
Thank you. Thank you, Chetan. Good evening, respected doctors. On behalf of INTAS and on my personal behalf, I am Javed, Sales Head for Inara Division, which is exclusively dealing with osteoporosis management therapies. And it's our proud and privileged moment to be a partner in this wonderful webinar titled as Osteoporosis Management. We all know osteoporosis is a very debilitating disease and it can hamper the quality of life of a patient, making them susceptible and predisposing to fragility fractures. Today, in fact, we all know that almost around 30 million of Indian population is been affected by this disease. And though so much of research has been done on its medical management, still this particular field is evolving, and there is always a urgent need to provide answers for the unmet need for osteoporosis management. So today, this particular webinar has been titled as Osteoporosis Management, which will throw light on by some expert eminent doctors who has come from Madurai to share with us their view on how they manage their osteoporotic patients. Let me have the proud privilege of introducing you to our first speaker, Dr. K.N. Subramaniam, sir. In fact, he does not require much of an introduction. He has done his fellowship. He is MS Ortho, orthopedic arthroscopy surgeon, who has done his fellowship in knee surgery and arthroscopy from York University in UK. He has done his fellowship in shoulder surgery as well from Canada. He is a senior consultant and assistant professor in Velamal Medical College and Specialty Hospital, Madurai. He is the president of Tamil Nadu Arthroscopy Society, and he is going to be talking to us, taking on osteoporosis medical management, along with two other colleagues hailing from the same place. I would like to now, with this short introduction and welcome address, I would like to hand over the rest of the session to Dr. K.N. Subramaniam, sir. For those who have registered on the portal, you have a chat box where you can post your questions, and at the end of the sessions of all the three speakers, they will be very happy to address your questions. Thank you very much for the wonderful opportunity, and I would like to welcome once again and hand over the session to Dr. K.N. Subramaniam, sir. Subramaniam, sir, kindly handing it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Javed. Thank you for doing such a nice webinar. So first is I have to thank Javed, Durai, and all his team members from INTAS, Mr. Kasimayan. All of them are doing a good job in terms of doing academic activity. And today's role is going to be to highlight points about osteoporosis, which he already mentioned that so many people are affected already. And still awareness is not there, at least in our part of the world, and across the globe also still the full awareness is not there. Hence this talk is to, this whole seminar or webinar is going to be on highlighting various things from my side about general osteoporosis management, and then Dr. Vetrinalathambhi, a spine surgeon, is going to tell about his views on spine osteoporosis, and then Dr. Kunal Deep will also join later on, who is going to highlight on osteoporosis and joint replacement. So with this brief overview, I would like to start my talk on the osteoporosis management. Shall I start share screening mode?
Please, sir, please.
Are you able to see the screen?
Yes, sir, we are able to see.
Okay, about 3-4 weeks ago, one of the member from INTAS came and asked me about selecting a topic. I was just thinking what to talk about osteoporosis, and I said that we will put a title like this: osteoporosis treatment. Fracture should not be the starting point. I think it may look controversial when you see this title, because that's what is happening. That is also not happening in India. Even after having a fragility fracture, people don't start on the treatment. And ideally, you should not be the starting point. We should be preventing the fractures. That's what the real scenario of the osteoporosis should be. But I don't think we have such a situation right now in India. I just want to show some examples first, see what is current situation, and then highlight about what osteoporosis means and what is the real situation in our population and also across men and women, and how we can identify and how we can start assessing them preemptively and start managing them with a simple algorithm at the end. But this is what going to be the overview of my talk. I just want to share some of the x-rays. This lady was referred to me actually by our gastroenterologist because this patient has got chronic liver disease. He's a 74-year-old male. He has not been mobile for almost 6 months, he said. And he has been almost like bedridden for 6 months due to his liver problem and other ailment. And he has been on steroid for his asthma in the past on and off. But he never gave a history of fall at all. But you can see that his right proximal femur is almost shattered. And the chronicity is shown by the whole shaft is almost migrated proximally and looking very bad. I was wondered, my postgraduate asked at the time that, sir, what is this? Not had a fall at all. How did he have a fracture? So this is what typical about fragility fracture. And it's not the energy of injury that breaks the bone. It's the quality of the bone. It succumbs it to even have a small injury itself or small uninjury itself can fracture the bone. Even my own relatives have come with a spine fracture where they never had an injury at all. They just obese individual. They just had a slight turning in there while they are sitting and suddenly they're out of pain and it came as a L1 fracture and T12 fracture. This is what the typical fragility fracture. The bad thing about this is not been on any bone supplements for this gentleman at any time. He has been having liver disease, he has been having steroids for asthma, and he is almost 74-year-old, and he never has been thought about by anyone who has given any bone supplement like calcium or vitamin D or whatever is indicated for osteoporosis. Nothing has been given so far. But that's what worries me. And after doing the surgery for him, which is did a bipolar hemiarthroplasty for him, and we added him in calcium, vitamin D, bisphosphonates, and teriparatide, he started mobilizing reasonably well, and he is reasonably okay now. Next, another one. This is another type of fracture. Had a trivial fall only, not a big fall. Okay. And for that kind of fall, an young adult will not break a bone for sure, just sleeping at home. But he broke a bone and broke into 4 pieces: greater trochanteric avulse, lesser trochanteric avulse, and intertrochanteric region. There is a fracture. And again, this gentleman never had any bone supplements, which also worries. And I went and did a fixation. After that, he kind of settled down, and we started on supplements like calcium and bisphosphonates and vitamin D, and he slowly settled down. But the thing is, we are missing the boat here. That's what it is. The fracture healing pattern for those who are having good bone quality is different for those who are not having good bone quality. So I have to really bet on him to make his fracture to heal, because his bone quality is not good. It's like, you can call it simply as not a conventional traumatic fracture, it's a pathological fracture. That pathological fracture means it's a fracture occurring in a diseased bone. So in fact, we all think it's a normal, but it's not a normal bone. It's an osteoporotic bone. So it's a diseased bone. So in fact, it is a pathological fracture, which is very common in spine and also in the wrist also. So this is what we are not aware of it, and we should be very important to find out all these things. See, this person, yes, you can see it, he could not lift his leg. He could not move. Just moving out of the bed only, he started having pain in the hip. And you can see there's a small line here. If you leave it as such, this will become a bigger breakage and they will end up in big fracture. And I checked the vitamin D level for him. You see, it's only 13. Okay, this is at least he had a fracture, and you can see vitamin D level is very low. Normally, we should expect around 40 or 50. 30 to 100 is considered as a normal level, and at least somebody should have 40 or 50. And whomever I check in India, okay, I mean, you come across patients, a lot of patients coming with around 20, 18, 15 like that. Some of them come with single digit also. And whoever we call it as normal, they also come around the range of 34, 35. They don't come around like 70 or 80. Normal value, if it is between 30 to 100, one should be expecting around 55 or 60 for their vitamin D level to be. But whoever we deem it as, okay, you have a normal vitamin D, then the value will be around 33 or 34 like that. So borderline normal they are. At any time, they can drift into the lower side. or abnormal side. So this patient broke the bone without even having a trauma, and I had to do a DHS for him. And in the meantime, we started on the supplements, calcium, vitamin D, and bisphosphonates. So this is the real scenario that we are coming across. So it just questions me: are we doing the right thing? Are we justifying our population by giving appropriate treatment? Do we have a way by which we can screen these patients, or do we have a way by which we can preemptively identify these and start treating them so that we can prevent fractures? This is what the main worry and talk is going to be about. I have to highlight certain important thing that about bone mineral density. It's a very nice picture actually. This is taken from a famous book called Review of Orthopedics by Miller. Okay, so this is a pure population of younger age. It's around population of around 25-year-old. This is the older age population. This is the bone mass that people have it. For example, in younger age, there is a lot of bone production. So osteoblast activity is going on, but osteoclast activity is very less. So eventually they will have increase in their bone mineral density and bone mass will be higher. That occurs up to the age of 25. For whether it's men or women, they keep on increasing the bone mass up to the age of 25 or a maximum up to the age of 29. After that, you can see that the bone mass starts reducing slowly. And at older age, it forms like you are having more running out than coming in. So the tap is flowing out, but nothing coming in. That's what the situation in the older age. Hence, the bone mineral density becomes very low, and their bone, I would say, it succumbs to injury or succumbs to fracture. As you can see from this graph, the upper graph is for men, lower graph is for women, and up to the age of 20 to 29, it reaches a peak. After that, whatever peak mass that you had at the age between 25 to 29, it's not going beyond that. So the best thing that we could advise for anyone is to develop his bone mass around the young adult age group itself, around the age of 20 to 29 itself. If he comes to a very high level, then even if your bone BMD decreases for him at a later stage, it won't be a real pathetic way. That's what I would like to highlight at this place to young people who are who needs prophylactic treatment or who needs advice for them. So if you see here, up to the age of 80 to 89, it slowly drifts down. But in the woman, it's very interesting thing. What happens is up to the age of 25, they increase and attain at one particular level. After that, there is no drift at all for them until they reach menopause. You see, around the age of 40 to 49, they reach menopause. Until that age, that hormone estrogen that they have, that keeps that bone mass to a very good level so that they don't lose any bone mineral density at all. But after that, they start drifting almost very heavily, and they surpass the men around the age of 60 itself. So it is typically said like 1% per year men will lose, but 3% per year women will lose after the age of 45. So by the age of 60 or 65, they have surpassed the men. And by the age of 80 or 75 or 80, they are really in a very bad state. This is something which we have to understand. This is a very biological thing and biomechanical which we should understand. Every orthopedic surgeon, not only all general practitioners, understand that our aim is to achieve the bone mass very high at the age of 25 itself. And then it starts decreasing, and we should find the ways by which we can stop this reducing so that we can prevent osteoporotic fractures. So to define how the WHO defined this, they define by comparing with the adult male, that is called T-score, where if somebody has got their bone mineral density lower than 2.5 standard deviation, then they can be called as osteoporotic, which is like -1 to -2.5 is osteoporotic, 0 to -1 is called osteopenic, and normal should be between 0 and 1. Okay, 1 to 2.5 is osteopenic. Sorry, I revised it again. I told it wrong earlier. 0 to 1 is -1 is normal. -1 to -2.5 is osteopenic. More than 2.5 is osteoporosis. This is what the typical definition from the World Health Organization. And T-score means you are matching with the population, which is the young adult population. And it may be unfair you comparing with young adult population for a older individual. So they brought the concept called Z-score, whereby you are comparing with the age-matched individual. So for example, 50 to 59-year-old check a DEXA scan and do a BMD, they will be checked with the age match individual, that is called Z score. So this is what the typical definition for osteoporosis. And the fractures occur where the potential fracture occur is mainly thought about in three important places. One is the hip joint, another is the vertebra, and one more is the wrist fracture. These are the three places where we have always been taught about fracturing due to osteoporosis. This is, I think, I would say this is probably a limited way of telling it. There are other fractures which occur due to osteoporosis, like proximal humerus fracture. I have seen distal femur fracture occurring due to osteoporosis. They are still not being kind of accounted for DEXA scan purpose. For DEXA scan purpose, we are only doing these three main spots: hip, spine, and distal radius. So if you see this vertebra, I'm not going to talk too much about vertebra because we have a spine surgeon who will wonderfully talk about it. It's a common pattern, is a compression fracture, codfish vertebra, and people come with a kyphotic deformity. The commonest reason why people get kyphotic deformity at the elder ages, you can see that multiple vertebra has become fractured, almost called as, we call it as Krummelstein or Krummel's vertebra, Krummel's disease we call it as, okay, where there will be multiple fractures due to osteoporotic fracture. They won't even give history of trauma at all. That's all the pathetic sequelae of the osteoporosis. So management of fracture is always difficult in this patient because whatever hardware you are going to use is not going to be that good. So we have to have special ways of doing the locking plate, or we have to use a nail, or sometimes we don't want to even go into the fixation aspect at all. We want to go arthroplasty because we know the fracture may not heal at all. Because it's not a normal, it's a pathological bone. Fracturing is going to be poor. So that's the way it works in many of the patients with osteoporotic fracture. They have to be dealt very, very like smoothly and softly. Even while turning for reduction of the hip joint, you can easily break the bone. That's not because you put it too much force, it's because the bone quality is that bad. So how do I find these patients? That's the next biggest task. Okay. We come across so many patients and very difficult to identify who is having osteoporotic, but we should have something in our mind. So for example, there are certain things like in the history, people coming with, we used to call it KKK syndrome, where we mean Kaikal Godadal syndrome. In colloquial term, we call it like this, okay? Where people come with lots of pain over the neck pain, body pain. If you call polyarthralgia, it will be there for anyone. And if you do many investigations, a lot of them will come as normal also. In fact, they may all be suffering from osteoporosis and vitamin D deficiency. They may have rheumatoid or some other disease, but they might be having osteoporosis and vitamin D deficiency, which may be the reason why they are getting all this myalgia and all. So identify the cause of osteoporosis and contributory factors for it. Assess the risk of subsequent fractures. Select the most appropriate form of treatment for them. Treatment may be very simple, but identifying these people is a very important thing. I have a routine practice of doing certain blood tests, and this is taken from British guideline from one of the British hospital, where you do like full blood count. ESR is mainly done to look for any myeloma or where any paraproteinemia, anemias, bone and liver function test, calcium, phosphorus, alkaline phosphatase. I do vitamin D routinely for in our group of population, and thyroid function test. These are all depending on the history of the patient. Then you might have to take this thyroid function test, serum testosterone, LH, FSH, and prostate-specific antigen for men, 24-hour urinary cortisol or dexamethasone to identify Cushing's disease or celiac disease. These are all like little rare things, but if they give a history, then you should go and investigate in that terms. The reason is to identify whether we are not missing secondary osteoporosis or secondary disease, secondary reason why this patient developed osteoporosis. Okay, there may well be a primary one. There is a primary, you just go and treat that primary osteoporosis. But if you have a secondary, you have to treat the underlying condition. That's the reason for doing all this. These tests are must. These may be optional, depending on the history of the patient. So next thing I want to tell about the risk factors, which is tells that the patient is going to have a fracture probability. Okay, and I don't think we all of them we ask these questions regularly, and it's not a routine practice. We may ask the question sometimes, but we don't take it in the mind for thinking about osteoporosis. For example, previous fragility fracture somebody already had means a hip, wrist, and spine. For example, they had a fragility fracture. Already they had osteoporosis. You don't even need a DEXA scan for them. You should be starting treatment. That's what it indicates. And anyone on steroid treatment for more than 3 months, then already their bone quality is not good. So they are in the risk factors. And parents showing that history of hip fracture indicates that indirectly they are having a genetic sequence whereby they are having osteoporosis. So one should ask about this also. And female hypogonadism, like where they don't get the protection of estrogen. So that's why they develop fracture. And low body mass index is not good thing. Body mass index should be ideal, around 22 to 25. If your body mass index is low, then you are having a fragile bone also. Remember that. And sorry to say that Asian origin also, this is taken from British book, and they say Asian origin patients are having more risk of osteoporosis because they are trying to compare all other race. Like for example, African population have a very good bone quality. Asian origin in comparison to African will have a very poor bone quality, and hence they have a high risk of developing osteoporosis. And smoking and alcohol is a dreadful thing for osteoporosis. Bones, they are not justifying their bone. Male hypogonadism, and all these drugs we sometimes easily miss out. They all can cause osteoporosis. Heparin, anticonvulsant like Eptoin and all, antipsychotics, all steroid medicines and hormone replacement. Contraceptive pills and GnRH analogs. All these can cause osteoporosis. So be aware of it. And the conditions like rheumatoid, untreated hypogonadism, prolonged immobility, which is a very common thing. Organ transplantation, type 1 diabetes. Remember, diabetes, type 1 diabetes is, though it may not be common, type 2 is more common. Somebody having type 2 diabetes for more than 15 years or 20 years, assume they are like type 1 diabetes. They behave like type 1 diabetes. So they might already be having osteoporosis, hyperthyroidism, gastrointestinal disease, liver disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary. These are all the patients who already are having risk towards osteoporosis. So we have a certain criteria for doing DEXA scan. And I will tell you at the end what is the problem with DEXA scan also. Okay, yeah. So one key risk factor or two key risk factor, then we should be doing DEXA scan. That's what the guideline says. But what is the one key risk factor? You see here, woman age 75 or less, which means anyone over 75, they don't need DEXA at all. They should be started on treatment without doing DEXA. This is for Western category. Western category population is life expectancy around 85 to 88. In India, the population life expectancy around 65 to 70 maximum. Okay. So if we take that factor into consideration, we should not be taking 70, we should be taking 65. So anyone above the age of 65, we should be really thinking to put the start on the treatment. And those who are less than 65, then they are a high risk group individual. Then if they had a fracture in the past, then you should subject them for DEXA scan. Or if they come into the fracture assessment tool, fracture risk assessment tool, it's called FracScore, where I will tell about it at the end. If they have a high chance of developing fracture in the next 5 to 10 years time, they should be subject to DEXA scan. Or anyone on steroid for more than 3 months, they should be subject to DEXA scan. Okay. And this DEXA scan is also not easy thing to get also, and there are only few centers have it. Sometimes if you have suspicion, you might as well start on the treatment. Nothing wrong in starting treatment at all. So other things, other risk factors you can see are family history, premature menopause, hypogonadism, more than 6 months of amenorrhea, low BMI, which I told you earlier about all these things. If they have anything more than 2 risk factors, then they should be subject to DEXA scan straight away. So lab investigations, I already mentioned to you about what I do: calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D, alkaline phosphatase. Alkaline phosphate is the only thing which gets elevated in osteomalacia. Osteoporosis primary may not be showing very high level. It may be normal also. Liver enzymes, creatinine, total protein and albumin levels, measurement of 24-hour urinary calcium. This I won't do it routinely, but in selected populations where I feel suspicion of secondary osteoporosis, then I will do this. Like somebody who has primary hyperparathyroidism, then I'll ask them to do it and send to endocrinologist also. So who needs treatment? In simple terms, anyone above 75, or in Indian scenario, you can even take it as 65. Anyone less than 65 with 2 risk factors. I mentioned as 75 there because it's a guideline, but you can relax your guideline even less than 65 also. Previous history of rigidity fracture, anyone. Rigidity fracture means hip, wrist, and spine fracture. If they are having that fracture at the age of 50 itself, then they should be subjected for starting the treatment. High chance of 10-year fracture in fracture assessment tool. I'll tell about this fracture assessment tool at the end. So what is the treatment? Is simple treatment. First is you have to start calcium and vitamin D. That is a basic. Whatever the requirement of calcium for every day, every person for every day, 1000 milligram to 1005 milligram per day is a normal requirement that should be supplemented in either by means of dietary or by means of pharmacological agent. And vitamin D supplement should be there 800,000 units per day. I would say this is the pharmacological treatment, but what is more important is good diet, avoiding smoking, avoiding alcoholism, and doing moderate exercise. In fact, the guidelines say 30 minutes of exercise at least at the minimum 3 times per week. Better to have more than 3 times per week, at least 3 times per week. So that is the initial treatment pattern. And the salient point is bisphosphonate forms the first line of treatment nowadays. Bisphosphonate means alendronate, zoledronate, ibandronate, all these come into the category of bisphosphonate. They all work by terms of reducing the bone resorption. And short is the first line of treatment. The only downside of bisphosphonate, you cannot give it for a very long period. So reassess the fracture risk after 3 to 5 years and see if they still have the risk, then you should be considering on other ways of treatment also. So consider anabolic therapy like teriparatide, calcium, vitamin D should be encouraged in the diet, and monitor BMD every 1 to 3 years. So how it works, bisphosphonate is by anti-osteoclast activity. There are two groups, non-nitrogenous group, nitrogenous group, and what we are commonly using is alendronate, risodronate, zoledronic acid, and ibandronic acid also they are available now. And their main function is an anti-osteoclast, which means it stops the bone resorption. So it only, if the bone mass is already good, at least it will stay, it will keep it at least stay safe. That's what it does. It doesn't form the new bone. And the downside of bisphosphonate is that if you give it for longer duration, that itself can sometimes cause stress fracture, which is more commonly seen in the intravenous type of treatment. So if you give it for more than 18 months, or sometimes I have seen like 2 patients where I have done, one patient I did nailing for the femur fracture because the patient came with a fracture in the suprachiasmatic area, which is a clear transverse fracture, which itself is usually a stress fracture, which the lady has been for 5 years in the bisphosphonate treatment. And sometimes people develop osteonecrosis of the jaw also. So these are all some side effects that can be linked to the bisphosphonates. Hence, they have another good one is a monoclonal antibody, denosumab, which inhibits RANKL from binding to the RANK receptor. And this also acts by inhibiting osteoclast activity so that it preserves the bone mass, existing bone mass. And recommended dose is 60 milligram subcutaneous injection every 6 months. And good thing about this is there is no long-term side effect even if you give it for longer period. So this is a good substitute for giving bisphosphonates, because bisphosphonate has a time limit. You cannot give it for longer duration. This can be replaced by denosumab. And those who are resistant and those who are having side effects with bisphosphonate like nausea, a lot of patients come with nausea and other side effects, then you can actually think about giving a denosumab. And the newer version, romosozumab, is also available. This is another humanized monoclonal antibody. They bind to sclerostin and to procure its inhibitory effect. And this is another good medicine to think about when you are doing osteoporosis treatment. So now I want to just highlight few things about by giving these bisphosphonates or teriparatide or denosumab, which fracture are we preventing? And if you see the vertebral fracture, non-vertebral fracture, which means wrist fracture and the proximal humeral fracture, all other fractures, and hip fracture, it has been shown that alendronate is one of the good medicine, which has shown to prevent all the 3 fractures. This is a study done for a longer time and has been published. And zoledronic acid is also very good, and it's a very convenient because it comes in one yearly dose. You can give 1 dose today and ask the patient to have the number and remind them after just before 1 year and ask them to come and put the injection. So it's a yearly dose, and it has shown to prevent vertebral, non-vertebral, and hip fracture. And similarly, denosumab also has shown to prevent all the 3 fractures. But there is some reservation about teriparatide where it has shown to prevent vertebral, non-vertebral. Hip fracture also it has shown some benefit, but it's not like as good like other agents like denosumab or alendronate or zoledronic acid. HRT is something one has to be aware of it, because estrogen is excellent protection for female up to the age of 45. Once they lose it, they start deteriorating very heavily. So HRT is recommended. But hormone derivatives like raloxifene and strontium, they are all have been recommended for osteoporosis treatment in patient, especially in women patient who are having osteoporosis. And teriparatide is something one has to be aware of it, because this is the only drug that we have which increases the synthesis of the new bone. Or like raloxifene or strontium, they also have similar property. But parathormone derivative with PTHRP is a teriparatide, is a drug which is very good in terms of increasing the bone formation. One downside about it is the cost, but which is being curtailed nowadays in the pharmacology market has curtailed the price also, so it is not become much worrying. But downside of it is that it cannot be given for more than 18 months. So by 18 months time, hopefully the treatment finishes and bone mass index becomes much better, and we can withdraw the treatment and then continue with just calcium and vitamin D, or continue with other agents. But the problem with this is because it's a osteoblast stimulating agent, it can also cause small evidence of neoplasm. Carcinogenic effect is there. That's why it has to be avoided for more than 18 months. Otherwise, excellent medicine for giving for osteoporosis. And where current indication for teriparatide is now, anyone who is resistant to treatment with the bisphosphonate, vitamin D and calcium, you want another agent to go, then you should think about teriparatide. Or special situation like where the T-score is more than -4 or more than -3.5, where you are thinking about patients who are having severe osteoporosis. These are the, or somebody who had 2 fractures, fragility fractures. Even in spite of giving the active therapy, if there are 2 fractures, then you should consider. And nowadays, the indication has been slightly extended to start giving treatment for patients who are having non-unions. Fracture non-union, there you can also think about giving teriparatide. That might help to form new bone and they can start developing fracture union. So the overall what I would like to say is curtail the bone loss by giving phosphate and bisphosphonate, halt the loss by giving supplement like calcium and vitamin D, and increase the bone gain by giving bone forming agents like teriparatide. This is the simple holistic overview of managing osteoporosis. And just go through this a rough guideline, where if you see anyone more than 75, straight go and start treatment. Anyone less than 75, look for fracture assessment risk. If they are having high risk chance, then you should go and start doing treatment after doing a DEXA scan. And anyone who has got had a fall in the past, even younger age, go on to DEXA scan. And there is this called fracture risk assessment tool. See what they are looking into this. There are like 12 questions in that, where you look for age and their sex, male or female, weight, height. This is to calculate a BMI and previous history of fracture. Parent had a fracture of the hip joint, smoker, alcohol, for those who are on steroids, rheumatoid, secondary osteoporosis, and BMD. Anyone having more than 3% chance of 3% risk in this, then they are having a high chance of developing fragility fracture. Then you should start on, you should submit them for either DEXA scan. You can even start on the treatment. There is a good study came from Ramachandra Medical College, Chennai, where they were actually comparing people without doing BMD and with doing BMD only by seeing the fracture assessment tool. And they found even without doing BMD itself, they can submit the patient for doing, they don't have to do a DEXA scan. They have a high risk of fracture, hence you can actually start on the treatment for osteoporosis. So with this, I would say that osteoporosis is a very common condition, but often very underdiagnosed. Our diagnosis should be encouraged, and we should have a separate eye, or it should be we should have a separate thinking for that. Unless we do that, we cannot identify these patients. It's important to identify all the risk factors. Those with risk factors should get DEXA scan, and treatment should be consistently continued. One of the common things which I noticed is if we give alendronate, for example, weekly dose, they are not compliant. Patients don't take it regularly. After 3 months, they will come, sir, and sir. They will come inside. So that's the reason we started on the zoledronic acid, where you can at least try to maintain the consistency. So compliance is very important for treatment. Otherwise, we lose the effect of the drug. So with this, I thank whole InTouch team and all others for listening to this talk. And any questions, I am very welcome to feel very obliged to answer it at the end of the session. Thank you. So with this, I think I will go on to the next talk, which is going to be about spine. and for which I'm going to invite Dr. Vetri Nalathambi, who is a good friend of me, and he worked along with me in Velamal Medical College a few years ago. He is completed MBBS from Stanley Medical College and did MS Ortho from Madurai Medical College. The thing to mention is he passed with the Professor Ramakrishnan Gold Medal, and he has done fellowship in spine surgery in MIOT Hospital in Chennai under Dr. C.S. Dillon for 2 years, his spine fellowship. And he has practiced in hospitals where he has worked as consultant spine surgeon. He has done, for his credit, many presentations and publications, and has got special interest in degenerative disc disease, spinal deformities like kyphosis and scoliosis correction, and spine infection. And to simply say, I know he's a very good person and is a very good surgeon also. With this formal introduction, I would like to invite Dr. Vetri Nalathambi to share his view on osteoporosis, its implication in spine. Dr. Vetri, are you ready to give your talk?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for your kind words, sir. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to talk about osteoporosis, its implications in spine. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
So, I'll be covering the spine surgeon's perspective of osteoporosis.
Sir, volume is slightly low, sir. Vetri, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I'll be covering in this talk, I'll be covering about the spine surgeon's perspective of osteoporosis, bionics of an osteoporotic spine, and the surgical planning in osteoporotic pathologies. So, as Tamil poet Saint Thiruvallur said, "Noi nadi, noi mudal nadi, adu thanikum vai nadi vaipachel." It means you have to know the cause and method of treating a disease to treat it properly. Osteoporosis. This is a very important line diagram. It was explained by K. Subramanian sir before. Here you can see that just a minute. So here you can see that you can, the bone mass is accumulated at an younger age up to age of 25, and after that it remains static, and as you grow older you start losing your bones. Women lose about 50% of their accumulated bone mass after menopause, and males lose about 30% of their bone mass after 40 to 50 years. The main thing to note here is the peak bone mass. The peak bone mass, which is achieved at about 20 to 25 years, determines the overall bone mass which you have throughout your lifetime. If you do not achieve your peak bone mass, you are prone to land up with osteoporosis. And one more important point to note is that healthy food, lifestyle, and exercises will help to prevent bone loss even at an older age. So, the causes of primary osteoporosis, as we know, normal aging, onset of menopause, dietary calcium deficiency, and progressive inactivity. Because of changes in lifestyle in recent years and changes in dietary habits, we see more adolescent people with osteopenic bones. And when you see any patient with back pain in your OPD, you have to rule out causes of inactivity, any causes of dietary deficiency, such like patients living in hostel, patients living outside of home. So you have to insist them to take proper calcium diet, and you have to encourage activity and outdoor sun exposure. Other than this, the other factors which we look into in a patient are causes of smoking. Smoking is directly proportional to disc pathologies. In smokers, you can see multiple level disc pathologies commonly. And the smoking also interferes with, if you plan for surgical intervention for a patient, smoking interferes with bone fusion and leads to post-operative infections. So this has to be strictly monitored, and it has to be informed to the patient that he has to quit smoking. And the next important thing which we look into is usage of steroids. Long-term steroid will lead to reduced bone mineral density. And the other thing is vitamin D deficiency. Osteoporosis is becoming more prevalent nowadays as the aging population grows exponentially. Most of them will require medical care at some point of time. Osteoporosis is directly related to spine pathologies. If you have severe osteoporosis, you are prone to have severe disc or degenerative pathologies. As described in this study, female patients more than 50 years who underwent spine surgery, among them about 50% of them had osteoporosis, which is a higher prevalence rate than in the general population. This study, you can see that it was done among elderly women for complaints of low back and for lumbar listhesis. In those patients, you see an increased bone fragility in patients with spondylolisthesis in females and with degenerative stenosis in males. So this all indicate that spine pathologies is directly proportional to osteoporosis. If the bone is weak, you tend to get spine pathology. Vertebral compression fracture is the most common condition prevalent in osteoporotic patients. We all know that bone mineral density is the investigation for evaluation and diagnosis of osteoporosis. But in many spine pathologies like spine arthropathies, disc degeneration, you get a false high value of BMD. And this in turn will you miss osteoporosis many times. So femoral neck and distal radius BMD is appropriate in these types of patients. One more newer modality which comes recently is vertebral fracture assessment. This is actually a DEXA imaging of the whole spine of the thoracic and the lumbar spine. It uses minimal radiation and it's very fast, and it uses a computer modulated software to analyze any compression or fractures in the spine. In future, this may replace normal X-rays. As we see from this graph, osteoporosis is becoming a major epidemic, even more than stroke, heart attack, or breast cancer all put together. So what's the concern with this osteoporosis? Osteoporosis predisposes patients to progressive deformities and they land up with neurological complications. Also, osteoporosis, when associated with any pathology, it increases the severity and decision making of treating each pathology. It also complicates spine surgery because it interferes with spine fusion and with choice of implants. So this is an example of a 70-year-old male who had pod spine. He had pod spine of C5, C6 vertebra. It looks like an almost normal alignment of the spine. And we started him on anti-tubercular treatment. After 10 weeks, you get to see an X-ray like this. Because of his osteoporosis, the bone has completely collapsed and it has formed a local kyphosis. He developed symptoms of myelopathy. So now what to do? Is surgery a viable option in these patients? Many studies have been done and it has been proved that the survival rate after spine surgery is comparable to any post-arthroplasty surgeries. And outcome of surgical intervention is much better than any conservative management. So if you apply the proper principles in treating an osteoporotic spine, you could get fantastic results. For this patient, C5 corpectomy was done and a tricortical graft harvested and 360-degree fusion was done to restore the alignment. He is now post 1 year and he is doing well. Now we will just analyze about the biomechanics of an osteoporotic spine. About 80% of the load during axial compression falls in the body and disc, and the remaining 20% falls in the facet joints. As you grow older, the composition of the bone changes and you are prone to more injuries. As I stated earlier, men lose about 30% of their bone after 40 years, and women lose about 50% of their bones after menopause. So this is a comparison between a normal bone and osteoporotic bone. Here you can see an osteoporotic bone, the trabeculae is replaced into thin spicules, and there is reduction in the number of horizontal trabeculae. Thereby, the vertical trabeculae lands buckling. So there is no support for the vertical trabeculae, and it starts buckling and it collapses. So this is what happens in an osteoporotic spine. So this you can see this picture. When a person lifts a weight, he experiences axial compression force along the vertebral column. And in an osteoporotic spine, the osteoporotic spine is not able to withhold the buckling force, and it tends to give way, leading to vertebral fractures. So typical osteoporotic fracture is a wedge-shaped fracture with a local kyphosis. And as stated before, where if a person develops vertebral fracture, his risk of developing subsequent fracture increases by 5-fold. This is called as vertebral fracture cascade. When a person develops multiple fractures and he lands up with kyphosis, you can see a shift in plumb line anteriorly. So this is the normal plumb line. When you draw a plumb line from passing from C7, it must pass through S1 or just anterior to S1. This is the normal plumb line. When this gives the sagittal balance for normal mobilization. When the person lands up with kyphosis, his plumb line shifts anteriorly. And this subsequently results in hyperextension at the lumbar vertebra, hyperlordosis at the neck, and flexion of the knee, pelvis back tilt. When the patient keeps walking with this posture, he starts developing wear in the lumbar spine, thereby resulting in retrolisthesis at the upper lumbar and anterolisthesis at the lower lumbar level. This is how simple osteoporotic fracture escalates the problem to complex pathology. According to Scoliosis Research Society, the normal kyphosis is 20 to 40 degree. A single anterior wedge compression fracture can increase your kyphosis by 10 degree. Usually in elderly patients, we can see with multiple fractures, even 70 degree kyphosis curves. So how to manage these spine pathologies? I would broadly differentiate into osteoporotic fractures and other pathologies. Initially, we will see about osteoporotic fractures. So vertebral fractures, vertebra is the most commonly fractured bone, and the type of fracture is like depending upon the patient, how he fell down, or depending upon the pattern of loading, you get different types of fracture. Broadly, we'll see about two major fracture types. In thoracic spine, because of the increased stress in the anterior margin of the vertebra, you tend to get an anterior wedge compression fracture. This is common in mid-thoracic level. And in lumbar spine, if the lumbar lordosis is maintained at the time of injury, you tend to get a central compression or a biconcave type of fracture. So normally, if most of these fractures can be treated by rest and conservative measures. If the patient has severe pain post vertebral fracture, or if he develops complications like Kummel's disease, osteonecrosis of the vertebra, he may require surgical intervention. So surgical intervention in the form of kyphoplasty and vertebroplasty are very rewarding in these patients. So this is a percutaneous technique which can be done transpedicular approach, or by near extrapedicular, or by far extrapedicular approach. When you use a balloon, it is called as a kyphon. When you use a balloon to elevate the end plate, and then when you inject cement into the vertebra, it is called as kyphoplasty. So this is an example of a balloon kyphoplasty. This is a wedge compression fracture. You insert a balloon into the broken vertebra, and when the balloon is inflated, the end plate is lifted up, and then you remove the balloon and inject cement into the vertebra, polymethyl methacrylate cement. Thereby, you can achieve a stable fixation and you can restore kyphosis. You can see that the kyphosis is, the kyphosis is corrected. If suppose, if the fracture has instability, like as you see here, or any posterior vertebral body breach, you have to stabilize, you have to do a short segment stabilization, and then you have to do a vertebroplasty. This can be done by minimal invasive techniques. So now we have seen about vertebral fracture, about other pathologies. Osteoporosis complicates decision making in every pathology like infection, metastasis, degeneration, and deformity. The difficulty in decision making lies in two things. One is choice of implant, and next one is achieving fusion. First, about choice of implant, about instrumentation. Because of the osteoporotic bone being very porotic and the trabecular pattern is very poor, any implant used to hold the vertebral body has a very poor pull-out strength. Also, the pedicles are widened similar to an osteoporotic femur. So these patients tend to land up with multiple problems like pedicle fracture, compression fracture, pseudoarthrosis, and adjacent disc degeneration. Usually, anterior instruments fail by continuous cycling loading and resulting in subsidence of the intervertebral device. And posterior screws fail by pulling out or screw loosening. So solutions for these instrumentation failure, we have to use multiple fixation points. We can augment the screws with polymethyl methacrylate cement. Expandable screws can be used. Hydroxyapatite coated screws can be used. Larger diameter screws can be used. We'll see everything in. Also, you have to keep in mind to achieve adequate pattern. You can minimize achieving coronal correction, but sagittal balance is more important. When in an osteoporotic bone, you have to dissipate the force so that the implants doesn't fail. When you use, we commonly use pedicle screws. Pedicle screws has a 3-column fixation. Usually it dissipates the force, but it is not enough in an osteoporotic bone. You have to use a combination of pedicle screw with laminar hooks or pedicle screw with sublaminar wires to achieve more torsional stability and to reduce the pull-out force. If you are going to do a deformity correction, you need at least 3 fixation points superior and inferior to the apex of deformity. So this is an example of a pediculolaminar fixation. You use the pedicle screw and along with that, laminar hook is used to dissipate the force which lands up in that vertebra. So this is a very good implant. Also, you can use sublaminar wires attached to the pedicle screws to dissipate the force. Another very important implant which we have to know is the Horschel rectangle. It is a vintage implant, but it's a very useful implant in cases of revision spine surgeries, in case of osteoporotic spines, but it is less well known. This used along with sublaminar wires will, when you apply pedicle screws in a divergent fashion, this also will help to dissipate the force and prevent failure in osteoporotic spine. When you have to correct deformities, you have to use at least 3 fixation points above and below the apex of deformity. We'll see about some other techniques for inserting pedicle screws. So the main, the weak link in this fixation is the bone implant interface. So if suppose if the pedicle screw fails, the revision becomes more challenging. So initially when you apply itself, you have to use certain principles. You can use bicortical purchase. Bicortical purchase increases the pull-out strength by 50%, but it is safer only at S1 level. And even at S1 level, end plate screws are better than normal bicortical purchase. So this is an example of an end plate screw, the screw passing through the end plate. This has a better hold and it is a well accepted screw. You can increase the screw diameter and thereby reduce the pull-out strength, but The problem is if the screw occupies more than 70% of the pedicle diameter, there are chances of pedicle fracture. Hydroxyapatite coating is one another technique which gives very good hold, but only when it integrates with the bone. So it will take some time for that integration. So at the time of fixation, the stability will remain the same like a solid non-coated screw. But once if it is integrated with the bone, it is a very difficult screw to remove. Another type of screw is the dual-threaded screw. Dual-threaded screw, you have a cortical threads at the neck, the proximal region, and cancellous screws at the distal region. So this will give adequate hold, and many Indian companies have adapted this design and they are producing at lower cost. And these screws have been commonly used in many osteopenic patients. Expandable screw
Dr. Vetri,
yeah.
your voice is quite feeble.
Okay, just a minute.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you now.
KNS sir, mute பண்ணீங்கன்னா நல்லா இருக்கும். I think that is interfere. Thank you.
Just a minute. Hello. Hello.
Sir, we are able to hear you, Dr. Vetri sir.
Yeah. Now is it fine? Okay.
Yes. Please continue.
Just a minute. Hello. Sorry for the interruption. So expandable screws. Expandable screws are being used in Western countries where after inserting the screw can be expanded to have a better hold in the vertebra. Another type of thing is the cement augmentation of the normal pedicle screw. So when you have to do cement augmentation, you can use fenestrated screws. As shown here, you can see two fenestrations at the distal end of the screw. When you can inject cement through the hole which is present in this cannulated screw, and the cement the cement passes through these holes to the vertebra and gives a better hold for the bone, for the screw. So this increases the pull-out strength by 250%. The advantage of cement augmentation is it immediately restores the strength and stiffness. And when the fenestrations are distal, it is safer and the cement will not leak back into the spinal canal, and it is much safer. Many other types of cement are used, calcium phosphate, ceramic resins, but PMMA is the standard and widely used one. Screw removal is not difficult with cement augmented screws because the screw cement junction breaks when you give a torque force less than 1 Newton meter itself. So this is one of our published work where we had analyzed the outcome of fenestrated screws with cement augmentation used for listhesis in osteoporotic patients. One typical finding what we observed is about 40% of the patient, even with T-score not in the osteoporotic range, needed osteoporotic screws. Thereby, again, reinforcing that BMD may be falsely higher in patients with spondylolisthesis. Cement embolization, which can happen during this procedure, is not a thing to worry. It is usually inconsequential. Two other implants being used in Western countries, but with some limitations. I will just mention for completion's sake. Interspinous process spacer, whereby you insert a spacer between the spinous process to maintain the extension of the spine. This will limit the lumbar extension and it will maintain the foraminal and canal height, but it can be used in minimal canal stenosis only. In severe stenosis, it cannot be used. And the integrity of the spacer depends on the stability of the spinous process. Sometimes the spinous process breaks and this implant fails. Another type of implant is the dynamic stabilization, wherein instead of a rod, you use a cord, a dynamic cord, which limits flexion and extension. It acts as a load sharing principle. So these are being still more, they are in evolving stage. So as newer implants are being developed, the implants is rising. A single fenestrated screw costs about 15,000. And if you had to do a construct like this, the cost shoots over the roof. So in Indian patients, if you have to do procedures with like cemented screws, you can use the normal screw with pre-fill cement pre-filling in the vertebra. What you do is you apply screws in all the level, remove the screws, fill the screw holes with cement, and then you can reapply the screws. This will reduce your cost by 1/6 actually, and it gives a stable fixation. And this is one study where they had told that a solid screw with cement pre-filling has a better pull-out strength than cannulated screw with cement injection. Also, to cut cost in kyphoplasty, you can adapt an extrapedicular single balloon kyphoplasty. If you use a transpedicular approach, you have to insert balloons on both the pedicles and it shoots the cost of the balloon by twice. If you use a single balloon, by Roux et al., they have described this technique. You can Google it. Through this technique, you can insert the balloon and you can keep the balloon in the center of the vertebra, and when you dilate it, it evenly expands the bone, and then you can fill the cement evenly. So now we have completed the implants part. Now we will come to fusion. In an osteoporotic spine, if you have to avoid straining the vertebra, you have to have a 360-degree fusion. This can be achieved most of the time by posterolateral or posterior transpedicular approach itself. In older patients, doing anterior procedures can land up increase their morbidity. Like if you have to go a thoracolumbar approach, you have to section the diaphragm, and this can be more morbid for the patient. Lesser types of osteotomies like Smith-Peterson osteotomy, pedicle subtraction osteotomy are better than vertebrectomy in older patients. Another debate which is going on is whether to preserve the end plate or to remove the end plate. Only Okuda et al. Has told that given a positive feedback for preserving the osseous end plate, whereby you, for achieving fusion, you don't remove the end plate as a whole. You just freshen it and add adequate graft to prevent subsidence. But this is again controversial. These are two examples. This is a case of fourth spine in the thoracic region. Here you have to, because the bone is already destroyed, you have to remove the bone as a whole, remove the end plates and give a good clearance so that you can use an expandable cage to achieve fusion. But here there are chances of subsidence is high. And in this case, this is another case of osteoporotic vertebra. Here there is no signs of infection. You need not debride the end plate. You can maintain the end plate and you can do a cage plasty and achieve correction of the osteoporotic vertebra. So if you are going to do anterior procedure for this patient, you have to stabilize it anteriorly also. And if you are going to correct a deformity in these patients, it is always important to concentrate on the sagittal alignment rather than coronal alignment. So we'll see complications which we encounter. Adjacent segment fractures. This is a 65-year female, a retired school teacher. She had Pott's vertebra and with myelopathy. She had multiple comorbid conditions, diabetes mellitus, uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, cardiac condition, hypothyroidism. Corpectomy was done and stabilized with screws and expandable cage. Anticipating adjacent segment fracture, we had injected cement in one of the adjacent vertebra to evenly share the load above and below. But what happened in 3 months is the vertebra next to the cemented vertebra started collapsing. And once we anticipated it, we tried to like we advised osteoporotic medications, but she was reluctant to, because already she was taking insulin. She was reluctant for one more injection. So we had given only oral medications. And then again, 6 months time, the collapse increased, but she was somehow mobilizing with support. And after 6 months, her pain started subsiding. And the vertebra looks almost healed, and she is after like she is post 1.5 years follow-up. Her anti-tubercular treatment has stopped, and we had started on osteoporotic medications. She is doing fine. So adjacent segment fracture is one of the common problem you see often with these patients. Another problem is graft failure. When you stabilize the graft anterior, but you do not fix anteriorly also, it can lead to graft failure. Cage subsidence. As you see here, you can see this was at the time of surgery, and in 6 weeks time, the cage has subsided by about 2 to 3 mm. This is also a common occurrence, but unless it doesn't fail, it's not an issue. So finally, we'll see about preventing osteoporosis. You have to increase your peak bone mass. Peak bone mass, which can be achieved at 20 to 25 years, is what is going to be throughout your lifetime. So you have to encourage patients to increase their peak bone mass, advise them to quit smoking, advise them adequate sun exposure, and increase physical activity. As recommended for children, you have to advise about 60 minutes physical activity every day. For adults, you have to advise about 2.5 hours physical activity per week. And for older age patients, additional to 150 minutes of exercise, they have to do strengthening exercises at least 2 days per week. So the take-home message is analyze the factors predisposing to osteoporosis in every patient, catch them young, understand the biomechanics, proper planning and instrumentation is required, and always have a backup of cement and SS wire when you venture on surgical procedures for these patients. Last but not the least, build your peak bone mass, maintain it, and prevent osteoporotic fractures. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vetri. It was a wonderful talk. I think you summarized everything about the spine and in the relation to the osteoporosis. So now let's move on to the next talk. Is Dr. Kunal in the system, isn't it?
Yes,
Kunal?
sir, he is there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So next is we are going to talk on in relation to the joint replacement, how osteoporosis has got its implication. And for that, I would like to invite Dr. Kunal Deep, who is well known to me. He is graduated from Madras Medical College, post-graduation there, and he has worked with various illustrious surgeons in Tamil Nadu. And he completed his prestigious Stryker Trauma Fellowship and Arthroplasty Fellowship from Seoul, Korea. And he is now a consultant trauma and orthopedic joint replacement surgeon at TORC, Torque Orthopedic Hospital in Madurai. More than all that, he is well known to me. He is a good surgeon. I invite him for giving his talk on osteoporosis in relation to the joint replacement. Dr. Kunal, are you ready to share your screen?
My screen is shared, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for Intas for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, K.N. Subramaniam, sir, for giving me such a nice introduction. And well, there were two wonderful talks before me, Subramaniam sir and Dr. Vetri. They have done a real good justice for this osteoporosis, and I think I will have to just summarize a very few things, and they have made my job very easy. So my specialty, I've chosen arthroplasty as my specialty, and so this specialty in arthroplasty recipients, we want to have a look at the disease burden of osteoporosis, which is more important. About 43 to 45% of patients are osteopenic, and up to 28% of patients are osteoporotic. So a total of 66 to 74% of people undergoing arthroplasty are penic or porotic. So causes of increasing incidence of osteoporosis nowadays, they've already extensively explained by the other two speakers. The aging population, so senility is a very important cause. Vitamin D deficiency due to staying indoors, especially during this COVID period, we are seeing a huge increased number of cases who are suffering from vitamin D. And senility again leads to absorption issues in the bowel. Senility again leads to sedentary lifestyle. Senility again leads to food habit issues. So all these are mainly senility, and vitamin D deficiency again because they are used to staying indoors, and they don't have an exercise protocol, especially in our part of the country where we see a lot of people very sedentary, and there is a huge lack of awareness. So this thing is a very pathetic thing that we are seeing right now. Even among orthopedic surgeons, we feel that there is a lot of lack of awareness about this osteoporosis, and even while even while treating our patients, we are I think neglecting this osteoporosis a lot. Diabetes pandemic, as others, as Sir has already clearly mentioned, diabetes pandemic has a huge impact on this particular osteoporosis. So as I've already said, they all summarized, it's because of staying indoors and sedentary lifestyle leads to decreased food intake, slow metabolism, lesser requirement of bone strength. And as Sir had beautifully illustrated with the diagram, decreased osteoblastic recruitment and increased osteoclasts, forming osteoporosis. Let's jump into the topic, osteoporosis and implication in hip joint replacement. So let us look at the hip joint initially, because both the hip and the knee joints, the major joints that we replace on a routine basis, are two different joints, and basically osteoporosis behaves in a different way in both the joints. So in hip replacement, what are the important points that we have to look at are the three major potential complications are intraoperative fractures, an increased risk of periprosthetic fracture, and a risk of late aseptic loosening. So these are the three most potential complications that we see in hip joint replacement. Intraoperative fractures, everybody have seen it. We have all experienced it. And it is approximately 4% after hip replacement. And the variability in the reporting, probably in various journals, is because of the use of different femoral stems and insertion techniques. And we always know that uncemented has a higher rate of intraoperative fractures than the cemented groove, as we go in for reaming and trying to get a better fit for the stem. These are periprosthetic fractures that we see very commonly. These are fractures that happen after the replacement. So you can see that the osteoporosis gives a very bad effect on all the bones, and even after replacement, we see that they don't. They sometimes come up with all these kind of bad scenario. And what is very pathetic is, after periprosthetic fractures, we fix the periprosthetic fractures, and after that, we see a lot of loss of fixation. So they are already old, they are already senile, they are already tired of surgeries, and we keep doing surgeries on them. It is very difficult for them. So osteoporosis leads to increased incidence of periprosthetic fracture, loss of fixation after surgical management of periprosthetic fracture, and multiple procedures to tide over the problem in elderly. It increases the morbidity to a huge extent. Aseptic loosening is a very well-known problem, mainly in osteoporotic patients because of wrong choice of implant in the wrong patient. Cemented is usually used above 75 years, as Sir said. Above 75 is a very huge age range for Indian population, and so it is better to think about 65 plus. So 65 plus in Indian population, it is better to go for a cemented type of implant, in which your cementing technique is good, and you are able to achieve a complete cement mantle around your stem as well as your acetabular component. I think that should be a good fit for them throughout life. And sometimes technique mishaps also happen. Narrow stems and improper cementing technique also leads to this aseptic loosening. Lack of post-operative osteoporosis protocol for these patients is a huge problem that we face. Again, as we said, awareness among our people. We need to look at the patients after we send them home. We need to take care of them after they come for stitch removal, and after that, what do you do? What are you doing about your patients after the stitch removal? That is something that we have to ponder upon. So some simple methods to overcome these problems that we have already seen. I would like to describe a preoperative, intraoperative, and postoperative uh, way of dealing this problem. So preoperative strategies, intraoperative skill and techniques, and postoperative protocol. So preoperative strategies, as Professor has already, Doctor has already mentioned, DEXA scan, vitamin D, calcium, and parathormone levels are there routinely in my preoperative assessment. And very important is patient optimization. Alkaline phosphatase is a very important blood test, which is helpful in this particular case to differentiate it from osteomalacia. And I think that also should be included in our preoperative workup. Patient, at least minimum, even if it is not as many as tests as Dr. Subramaniam sir has already said. I would like to add these basic tests at least before we go in for surgery. Patient optimization is very important. So we need to manage obesity. Obesity is a huge problem. So I noticed that a reduction in the bone mass causes osteoporosis. Also, obesity is a huge problem for osteoporosis. And obese people are mainly sedentary and senile, sedentary, and they don't do much of work. And so these people, you have to, when you see a huge person coming in for surgery, you have to be wary of your osteoporotic state. So practically, you have to take care of obesity. Osteoporosis preoperatively, if the surgery can be postponed. So in some cases, we can postpone the surgery. So replacements are elective procedures, and hence osteoporosis management preoperatively will give you huge good results and will reduce patient morbidity to a huge extent. Choice of implant, again, as I already said, uncemented or cemented implants. Elderly osteoporotic bones, you go for cemented implants, and HA coated stems fare better than porous coated stems. So there's always a debate, and in the few journals that I have gone through, I think HA coated stems fare better than the porous coated stems. So you see this patient around 60 years, we see that there's a lot of osteoporosis. And I have deliberately left that age there. She claims that she's 60, but I think she must be around 65. So we had to look at the bone, look at the post-operative 4-year post-operative X-ray. That even that picture shows osteoporosis, and we have tried to improve it from what we've seen pre-operatively. And but the patient is doing well. And this particular patient has to be put on post-operative protocol in a very big way. Moving on to intraoperative strategies, we need to be very careful about the intraoperative management that we take care as surgeons. This depend on hugely on our skill, and these are basic things that we already know. Excessive drilling and rasping in osteoporotic bones to ensure a proper fit of components, produce mechanical and thermal damage to bone and impair bone growth. So whatever little bone ingrowth that you expect is going to be worsened by rasping and over reaming. So you should be able to settle down with the particular size. Osteoporotic bone over reaming also causes your in uncemented implants, it causes a decrease in bone ingrowth. So a good fit of implants within the bone is the priority, however. So you should achieve good fit. And in acetabulum, a host bone coverage of the acetabular component, we all know that that is very important. It takes more importance in these osteoporotic patients. We always try to medialize the implant as much and try to get a good coverage, but in doing that, we should not forget that there is a greater possibility of migration of the implant medially. And as patient walks, we've seen devastating conditions where we see the cup inside the pelvis. And so you have to be very careful about the depth of reaming as well. So these patients have papery thin bone, hand reaming is better. Make sure you have an enough coverage of the cup, but don't overdo it. So post-operative protocol has Subramaniam sir and Vetri, both of them have given a good idea about things. Anabolic hormone therapy, that is what is the in thing right now, teriparatide. Make sure that they don't have any parathyroid adenomas. I just want to add in that. Because sometimes we've seen while taking parathormone levels, even pre-treatment of teriparatide, they have huge high levels of parathormone, and so we try to avoid them in those patients, and that's why we do the PTH in all the patients. Vitamin D levels, vitamin D is also an anabolic component, and there are newer drugs such as prostaglandin EP4 receptor antagonists, DKK1 antibodies, and anti-sclerostin antibodies. These are all under study, and they are slowly coming out. And now we find more attention towards osteoporosis. Probably in the last decade, there has been a lot of study and a lot of importance to this. Still, a lot is wanted. Anti-catabolic drugs such as calcitonin bisphosphonates, the rank denosumabs, and select SERMs, which used to be the treatment, are also helpful in anti-catabolic activity. Both anabolic and anti-catabolic mechanisms. Strontium ralliate is very, the use of strontium is very common in countries outside India, but here we don't do it much. But I was very interested in this simvastatin. This is something new I saw when I was looking up right now. Simvastatin has a role in osteoporosis. I'm not sure how well this has been documented, but this is there in one of the papers. Now, we've seen what we should do in osteoporosis. What we should not do in osteoporosis takes a very huge importance, and NSAIDs are a huge no-no, because we prescribe NSAIDs even after surgery. And this I have been practicing for the past 1 year. I don't use much of NSAIDs. I rather go in for opioids and paracetamol infusions, and maintaining with that mainly. And in very, very rare cases, I try to go in for our NSAIDs, but I try to avoid them. And this is a good practice, I think, for our young surgeons who are looking for osteoporotic treatment. And SSRIs also cause implant failure. SSRIs are also a problem with ingrowth of bone. And loop diuretics are also have a negative effect of osteointegration of implants. And so we try to get a physician opinion before, and then we change it. Now, a very interesting part is enoxaparin. I have been using enoxaparin for a very long time, but recently I have switched to fondaparinux and also dabigatran, because these enoxaparin, warfarin, dalteparin, and enfenoxaparin, all these drugs are inhibiting titanium osteointegration. Yeah, so all these are to be avoided. Moving over to the knee joint replacement. So knee, we've seen something about the hip and hip replacement osteoporotic issues, and these osteoporotic issues creep up very often nowadays, and this is very important to look into your hip replacement. Make sure you get the patient to walk very early, because proprioception that they lose, they have to get it back very soon. So make sure you make them walk very early, and do a procedure that will make them walk very soon. So you have the choice of your procedure is going to be based on that. And osteoporosis and its implication in knee joint replacement. Again, we go in for aseptic loosening, intraoperative fractures, both tibial and femoral, pain after total knee replacement, increased risk of hip and spine fractures, and periprosthetic fracture. So aseptic loosening, we have all seen tibial plate sinking, and we have also seen patellar component loosening. It is good practice that I think in most of South India, we don't do a lot of patellar resurfacing, but Northern India and abroad, they do a lot of patellar resurfacing. Patella in Indian population is very small, and so we tend to put the minimum size, which is usually larger than the patella that we see in our population. And So you have a very common recipe ready for your loosening there itself. And anyways, the patella is a very osteoporotic bone. In osteoporosis, patella is very uh, cancellous, and so the cancellous bone is also very weak, and so it doesn't hold the implant very well. So it is better not to resurface the patella if the patella is okay and decent enough. And sinking of the tibial component, I would like to go take it a bit more seriously, because how we prevent sinking of tibial component is also important. Tibial component sinking and patellar component loosening, and also in the femoral component we have loosening as well, because of proper proper cementing technique. The cementing technique, if you have issues, then they don't integrate well, and the femoral component also loosens. So then we have intraoperative fractures. We see intraoperative fractures, which is very common in lateral plateau and anterior cortex in the tibia, and usually it happens during lateral spike insertion and anterior cortex due to your medial spike insertion, and the posterior spike also causes fracture of the tibial plateau. Okay, in the picture that you can see, it was because of a anterior forward pulling of the forward drawer of the tibia, and the spike placement was not right, and so we had a fracture there. So these are problems that we can absolutely avoid, but osteoporotic people, they tend to easily fracture out. The tibial fracture incidence occurs during exposure and preparation. So this is very important. During exposure and preparation in osteoporotic bone, the tibial fractures, the tibia fractures. And sorry, yeah, sorry, I just left one slide. So this in femur is more commonly fractured bone than the tibia, actually. And 0.4% of intraoperative fractures happen during primary TK, and incidence is small, but it's very important because 21% eventually underwent revision TK. So that is the problem that we face. Posterior stabilized knee is more common due to the box cut in the femur. We have all experienced that. Box cut in the femur has causes the condylar fracture, which is very common. And medial femoral condyle and lateral femoral condyle are the commonest fractured bones. We've seen hip and spine fractures after total knee replacement, and spine is more common than femoral neck. I am sure Dr. Vetri will corroborate that. And femoral neck fractures have been documented. Bilateral femoral neck fractures have been documented in 3 cases so far, and that is really surprising, because the strain and stress is transferred from the knee to the hip. So intraoperative precautions that we have to take in total knee replacement include preoperative planning. So preoperative planning is very important. You have to identify the problem. If you take short x-rays, it is not going to help you. You have to take x-rays of the total limb so that you can identify that there is this problem, and also take DEXA scans to make sure that you have you know that you are dealing with a osteoporotic bone. To prevent intraoperative surprises, yes. And the usage of stem extension for tibia and femur in osteoporotic cases. It is very common to overlook this particular point with regards to sorry, with regards to osteoporotic patients. Stem extension for tibia and femur, for cost cutting purposes, we usually go for just the tibial base plate, but I think we should think about using tibia extension in all osteoporotic patients, and femoral extension whenever you need it. And take thinner bone cuts, as the soft tissues will be weak and thinned out and will expand during trials, especially in inflammatory cases. It's very important to take time in balancing right in inflammatory cases, as the bone will be osteoporotic. Tibial base plate coverage include both cortices. So make sure that the tibial base plate coverage is including both the cortices, and this helps in preventing the base plate sinkage, and which is very important step for you to prevent this particular tibial base plate sinking. And be careful when you place your bone levers and spikes, so which is a very important point that you have to think about when you're doing your replacements. So you see that we had this is a patient who had already had a small unicortical fracture, and the patient was complaining of a anterior shin pain when she came for the replacement. Actually, pre-operatively, we did not think of any fractures or anything. She was very fine. She was very limping, but she did not have much pain. But when she came for admission, we saw this, and then we had to do a long stem implantation for this patient. So it is very important to pre-operatively prepare. So this particular case gave me a very good insight in pre-operative planning. And this particular case, we had an intraoperative fracture. So while placing a lever, we had a intraoperative fracture. You see that the medial condyle has been, medial epicondyle has been fractured. We had an MCL avulsion injury there. And so we had to put in a screw intraoperatively. So all this takes to the point that you need to have your complete trauma set ready before you do your knee replacements in osteoporotic bones. And so this is very important to take a look before your surgery, and make sure you have your complete set. Don't think that this is going to be an easy case and just finish it off with that, and make sure you have condylar backup as well. So the backup should include all your stems, and your inventory should include your stems as well as a semi-constrained knee insert, as well as constrained knee implants as well. So in some cases, constrained knee implants will be a problem. Sometimes your ligaments will be a problem. You will find surprises inside. Surprises are left, right, center. Always you find surprises. And so make sure that you have your constrained knee always as your backup. So I would like to discuss my post-operative osteoporosis protocol here. I always avoid NSAIDs nowadays. For the past 1 year, I don't use NSAIDs. I use paracetamol infusions and narcotics for post-op pain relief, as I've already talked about. And injection zoledronate infusion, I always give them on a third day during admission. So third day after admission, I give them after the surgery, I give them zoledronate, and I take 1 gram calcium citrate maleate from post-op day 2. Vitamin D supplementation from the third day according to vitamin D levels taken pre-operatively. I encourage protein-rich food for the patients, and because I want to prevent a negative balance, negative protein balance, and to maintain an anabolic state, and injection teriparatide for 3 to 6 months in case of severe osteoporosis or perioperative fractures. And in case of special cases, where there are comorbidities, I don't think twice to take an endocrinologist opinion, and I go ahead with the help of my endocrinologist. He takes care of my osteoporosis treatment. So looking at the take-home points, against the general belief, osteoarthritis does not seem to protect a patient from generalized osteoporosis. A preoperative suspicion along with planning is a must, and you take intraoperative precautions and have a fallback plan with instrumentation and proper inventory. Have a good postoperative institutional osteoporosis protocol so that it doesn't depend on you, it goes on automatically. Just a small anecdote from one of the articles that I read. This is an interesting study by a questionnaire among ortho doctors. So over 60% reported that low BMD is a reason to reconsider operation strategies. 26% felt that they would change their treatment strategy in case of BMD between minus 1.5 and minus 2, which is osteopenia, and 40% in case of T-score between minus 2 and 2.5. So in osteoporosis, so about 29% would change their intraoperative strategy if a T-score smaller than minus 2.5 was there. So notwithstanding all this, ortho doctors have said that about 29% would change their strategy, but only 4% performed BMD measurement preoperatively. So this is the sad state of affairs, but we need to back up on this. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the opportunity that Intras has given me. And thank you so much, Dr. Subramanian sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Kunal. You made a very nice overview of osteoporosis in relation to the joint replacement. Is there any questions in the chat box, Javed?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening, and it was a wonderful presentation. Just give me a minute. I think we had around 150 registered doctors, and they have posted some, and few of them have posted some interesting questions. First, I would probably, within the panelists, you can decide who can answer this question. First question is from Dr. Gurusamy. Sir, without taking an DEXA report, how it is safer to start osteoporosis treatments? In our cities, there is no option for DEXA. What would be your advice on that? Ken, sir, would you like to take this?
Yeah, it is a difficult situation because DEXA scan is not available across the country in all the small places. Okay, yeah.
True.
And those who have, I think in my talk I gave a small overview saying that anyone had a frigidity fracture or
Yes.
more than 65 age and who are having 2 risk factors already and doing a fracture assessment risk tool, they are already having a high suspicion of, then you don't need to do BMD at all. You can just go and start the calcium and vitamin D supplement at least. You're not going to harm any patient by doing that. Okay, yeah.
True, true.
Can I pitch in a point here?
Yes, please, sir.
Yeah, a simple hip X-ray will give you a good idea. There is something called a SINGS index. I think you should have a look at the SINGS index. It is a very simple index that you can find using the tension and compression lines of the hip. And that I think in the periphery should do good. I do a lot of management using hip X-rays, and I think that is a very good tool. Thank you.
Okay. The next question is for Dr. Kunal, sir. Sir, the aseptic, this is from Dr. Bala Sukumar. Sir, the aseptic loosening happens due to wrong method of surgery or osteoporosis. What is your advice on that?
Commonly, during uncemented implantation in osteoporotic patients, there is a common mistake that we do is over-reaming. So we ream the patients and then we put an implant which is loose fitting. And finally, that is what we feel that fits him. So this problem should be definitely taken care of. And this will cause aseptic loosening very soon. And apart from that, the dynamics of the hip and proper post-operative protocol also gives a problem with this. And we have to take care of post-operative protocol, which is very important. Doing a surgery, yes, your technique is going to make a huge impact, but post-operatively, you should take care of this as well.
Okay. I think the next question would be related to spine, I suppose. I think Dr. Vetri sir can take it. A patient reporting to you with a osteoporotic vertebral compression fracture, what would be your line of treatment, medical management?
So when a patient comes with vertebral compression fracture, initially we start him on we give him a dose of zoledronic acid. Hello?
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please continue.
Yeah, depending upon the affordability status of the patient, if the patient is of a poor economic status, we can start him on, give him a single dose of zoledronic acid and start him on calcium, vitamin D supplements. When the depending upon textbooks, if you have to start injection teriparatide at the first point itself. But we give an option to the patient whether they are willing for starting injection teriparatide. And if they are comfortable or if they are affordable taking it, we give them teriparatide injection for 6 months, and then we switch on to bisphosphonates. Otherwise, we give a single dose of zoledronic acid and give them calcium vitamin D supplements. But when they develop a second episode of a vertebral fracture, definitely we insist them to take teriparatide injection to at least 6 months. The book guidelines says we have to go for 1 year, and then switch over to bisphosphonates, 1 year gap, and then restart teriparatide. We usually go for at least 6 months, and then we switch over to bisphosphonates.
Sure. We have one more question from Dr. Balasukumar once again, and this time it is for Dr. Subramaniam sir. What is your choice of drug on osteoporotic fracture patients on post-operative conditions?
First is you have to supplement with calcium and vitamin D. That is the most simple and basic thing. Everybody should have calcium and vitamin D in the correct dosage form. And then you start on the bisphosphonate, which I am starting is nowadays is ibandronic acid, okay, which has got a monthly dose where you can, the remaining days will be given by a calcium supplement and ibandronic acid will be given on a monthly dose. And anyone who had a fracture where I think they may need the fracture is not in where you need some support for union and all, then you start on teriparatide straight away. For 3 months, give teriparatide. And especially
Right.
non-unions and all, you definitely start it straight away. That
Sure,
is the
sir.
protocol I'm following.
Sure, sir. I think last question from here, from the panel side here, I mean from the chat box, is what is the panelist experience on combination therapies? There are various drugs available for osteoporosis treatment. Would you prefer a bisphosphonates and a teriparatide combination, or for a treatment naive patient, would you advocate a monotherapy? I think any of you can take up that question.
I will answer that.
You want to
Yes.
take it? Better you take it.
Yeah. Shall I say?
Yes, please.
Please.
So usually, see, bisphosphonates will act on it will inhibit osteoclast, and teriparatide will promote osteoblast. So combination therapy is always advisable. You start switch over to bisphosphonates. That is what is advisable. If you in certain situations where you have patients with chronic kidney disease and tumor patients, you cannot start a teriparatide. You can use denosumab, but always it is a combination therapy works very well rather than a single medication.
Okay.
And he rightly said, you will not combine an anti-osteoclast agent to osteoclast agent. You are going to combine an anti-osteoclast agent and a new bone forming agent. So teriparatide plus bisphosphonate like that. Not a bisphosphonate and a denosumab.
So it would not be two bisphosphonates. It will be an anabolic therapy with a catabolic therapy, if I mean in one way. Anti-catabolic. Yes. Okay. Fair enough. Sir, I think we have come to the end of this session right now. And on behalf of Intas, I would like to thank you for a wonderful webinar, I would say. In fact, thank you for the time that you have spent in making these presentations. First, I would like to thank Dr. K.N. sir for giving us an opportunity and for helping us to partner with this webinar, and who started the ball rolling with regard to osteoporosis management, followed by implications on spine for an osteoporotic bone, and joint by Dr. Vetri sir, and the joint replacement and osteoporosis. I think many of them, I mean, this is one of the first time I am actually listening to talk on joint replacement and osteoporosis, and he has very beautifully, all of you have in your respective topics have beautifully illustrated that osteoporosis is the culprit, and we cannot remain silent about it, though it is a very silent disease as well, right? Sir, if you ask me, our division is totally dedicated towards osteoporosis management. It was in 2010 in Jaipur IOCON that we launched teriparatide, which is a biosimilar, first biosimilar of teriparatide in the country. And from then on, sir, it's been totally a decade of strengthening bones and strengthening India and helping the osteoporotic patients come back to their quality of life. And even in this pandemic situation also, we are trying to probably make this therapy more affordable to your patients. We have reduced down the cost of teriparatide, and it is now becoming more affordable to your patients, sir. And to make the treatment basket more comprehensive, we have launched world's first biosimilar denosumab also by the brand name Olimab, And we also have zoledronic acid. So we have a complete basket of osteoporotic treatments for the benefit of your patients, sir. And today I would like to share one thing from my side, that monitoring of therapy for an osteoporotic patient is very, very gray. Still, even International Osteoporosis Foundation also keeps talking about papers with regard to monitoring of therapy, sir. For an anabolic therapy, of course, through X-rays and other symptomatic, you can see the benefits. But from our side, for all your patients whom you recommend teriparatide, we do a bone formation marker test free of cost at baseline and subsequently after 6 months, where you could probably show the patients how the rate of bone formation has increased. Our colleagues is meeting you in Madurai, so he'll be able to provide you further details with regard to this particular test as well, sir. Right, and of course, Durai is there, and I'd like to thank my entire field team for helping us with this program, sir. This is my our first association with you on this digital platform. Because of this pandemic now, we find this platform more and more useful so that we can reach across to the doctors, sir. Today, your presentation was heard by around 150 doctors. And it was also streamed live in YouTube. We don't have the data because once after the program, we'll be able to have the data, I mean, number of people who are logged in YouTube as well. Subsequently also, if there is some interesting programs which you would want to probably partner with us in terms of digital transmission or broadcasting this, do let us know, sir, as well, anytime, right? So thank you very much for your valuable time and a wonderful webinar, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Javed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Right, sir. With your permission, we are leaving the portal, sir, right now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank
Shetil, it is over from our side right now.
Thank you.
Shetil, can we leave? Is it okay?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
sir. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I close it now?
Yes, you can close it. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. You would be sharing the recording of this program, right?